Welcome. Thank you for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
And so, Educated came out in 2018, right? 5 years ago. Is that wild?
Yeah,
Think
it
about?
went fast. Yeah.
And I'm going to assume that a lot of people have read the book, but I also kind of feel like when you assume that everyone has the same baseline knowledge when they come into a conversation, that's an assumption that leaves somebody isolated. So, let's not make that assumption today. And instead, do you just want to tell your origin story?
Sure. Yeah, I was born in rural Idaho to my parents were, they were eccentric, I think you could say. They didn't believe in a lot of the things that most people take for granted, so we weren't put in school. We didn't go to the doctor, the nurse. I didn't have a birth certificate till I was 10. So we lived in this kind of isolated way, and then for a lot of reasons that it would take me a long time to explain, I ended up going to university when I was 17, and I pursued education after that for 10 years. I'd never been in a classroom before, but that was my first time, and I took to it. And education really changed my life. I ended up getting a PhD from Cambridge, and just a totally different life than the one I was born into.
I like the casual. I ended up getting a PhD from Cambridge. It's very.
Well, I overcompensated, I think.
There you go. So I've heard you over the years give like a few different definitions of what education and educated means to you. They're all like thematically similar. What's your current view, like what the definition of education is?
I used to say a lot that education is about getting access to different perspectives and points of view so that you can choose what you want to believe and kind of participate in the creation of your own mind. And I still believe that. But I also think education has a lot to do with imagination and with having experiences that are outside of the realm that you might have been born into. And I think what happens when you have different experiences is you get an opportunity to change and to grow.
Yeah.
And so I think my ideas of education are also growing, changing.
Why is that important?
Why is it important that they change?
Yeah.
Or
Well, perspective, views changing. Why is that important to you?
Well, I guess I've started to feel that I think there's a way that we can define education where it's about knowing things and knowing more than other people and being very factually correct. And, I think facts are important. I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, it's all relative. I think some things we do know, but I think education can also be about curiosity, and it can be about inquiry, and it can be about wanting to understand how other people think and have the kind of flexibility of mind to understand another person, even if they're really different from you. And so I sometimes think that maybe education is less about knowing more than somebody else and maybe more about knowing somebody like really well.
There's this. So I'm gonna act as if your book isn't your life for a couple of seconds because it's
I
kind
would
of
love
weird.
to act
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that
there you go.
also.
Um, but because it's just weird to be like, you said this thing, 30 years ago. But there's a line in the book that I like really stuck with me. You were, tell me if
It
I get this a little bit
stumped
wrong.
you.
It stuck with me.
Oh, stuck you. Oh, stuck with you. That's
Yeah,
better.
maybe both, but I think just the sticking. So you were describing sitting at a desk that I think was your brother Tyler's desk at one point, but he had left the house. And you said that there was this crucial skill that you were gaining while you were reading scripture, which was the patience to learn something you didn't quite understand. And that, it stuck with me
In this
because
case, the Bible. Yeah.
yeah, there you go. It really stuck with me because, like, the idea that an education and skill set of being able to lean into something that you don't get, like, I think was just fascinating. Why was that crucial? You describe it as a crucial skill, and I'd love to understand why.
Well, I think it's one of the nice aspects of a religious education, and there are other not nice aspects that can come along. But I think one of the nice aspects for me was that the world was meant to be mysterious, and you were meant to engage with it on those terms, and it wasn't meant to be completely understood. And I mean, it's interesting to contrast, being 8 or 9 years old and reading the Bible, which is a very confusing book. Even as an adult, it's a pretty confusing book. But as a child, it's a very confusing book. And just reading it because you're supposed to read it. And it's very different if you think about our technology environment where all information is kind of infotainment a little bit. Like
Yep.
everything is entertainment. And it's also information. But but there's a strange like immediacy to everything now, and things are meant you immediately are supposed to get to the point, and there isn't really a lot of what I think the more artistic mind, or I think Rilke once called it like gestation. Like a lot of things require a gestation before they really come into being, and I think our current climate is not cultivating that so well.
Gestation.
Yeah, that things take time. It's not just that things are created in 1 second or understood in 1 second, but you actually have to take them and be with them for longer.
Yeah. And there are a few subjects in your time that you said you taught yourself, like algebra.
I tried.
I believe was a struggle.
I
I remember that being a struggle. What was the motivation? Like, what did it take to get through that? I imagine there's a lot of internal motivation, external motivation. Why?
So I decided I wanted to go to university for one. I'd never been in a classroom. I didn't really know what a university was particularly, but I had this older brother who was, kind of freakishly intelligent. And he had gone to 1 year of high school. My dad had let him go. And then he taught himself algebra. And then he taught himself calculus.
Yep.
But he didn't have a math book. He had to go to the high school and say to the teacher, "Can I have a calculus book, please? I want to teach myself this." And the teacher just laughed. It's like, "You can't teach yourself calculus." And he's like, "Yeah, I can." And he was right. So he took himself off to university. And then he came back when I was 15, 16 years old and said, "You should go to school." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you really like singing. You want to learn how to sing. They teach you how to sing there much better." And he played opera for me, and he played all this choir music that I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. No one is born knowing how to do this. You really do have to go somewhere, and people will teach you how to do this. And so I started trying to do what he did. I bought an algebra book. I started trying to teach myself algebra. I was not as successful as he was, but enough that I could kind of scrape through the exam. And it's a weird thing to tell people. I taught myself algebra because I love to sing. But that is the truth. I taught myself algebra because I wanted to go and sing. And I don't know what the moral of that is, but maybe it's something like, I think we should maybe think carefully before we diminish any passion that we find in a child, because passion is pretty rare. And what it really is just a love of hard work, when you're working, but you don't even know you're working. And you don't know where your passions will take you, but you know that having no passion will take you nowhere. So I love to sing, so I went to Brigham Young University because I thought maybe I'll be a choir teacher or I'll teach voice lessons. That was my thinking. And then at Brigham Young, I discovered I actually really like philosophy, and I like history, and I like words, and I like books. So then I went to Cambridge, and at Cambridge I got this crazy idea that I should write my own book. And you just don't know where things will take you, but I think that ability to love something is the most important thing. And I don't know as though it matters so much what the thing is. It's just the ability to love doing something is, I think, so important.
It's powerful. And I want to pull on another thread here because, you had 7 siblings, I believe.
I had there were 6 siblings, 7 of us all together.
7 total. And 3 of you have PhDs.
For a minute, I doubted myself. It's like, do I have 8?
Yeah.
No.
You have 12 siblings.
Yeah, okay.
The 3 of you have PhDs.
It's true.
And so
weird.
It's
Weird.
It's fascinating. I think partially because there's one thing, if you went off and got PhDs and it didn't happen for anyone else. When you talk about hard work, learning hard work, the passion for learning, what do you think? Not to talk for your brothers necessarily, but what do you think led to 3 of you going beyond the education the majority of?
I mean, if
America
you
does?
met them, I think you'd understand. I think you meet me. I hope I seem like a fairly normal person. I hope. I'm aiming for normal. That's my aim.
Shoot
They're
for
like
stars,
smart, I mean, you meet them, especially my brother Tyler, you meet him and you're just like, this guy is operating on a whole different level. And so I think, I'm interested in questions about resilience and opportunity and why do some people do well and some people not do well. And I look at my brothers and I think they were so smart, they were not going to be stopped. Like nothing was going to stop them. They just, Richard, when he was young, I remember would hide under the so we had one of those chairs that you pull the thing and the thing, he would hide under there and he would read the encyclopedia. Like, he would read the encyclopedia, you know, like I'm not like that. Like I said, I'm more normal. And I just think they were exceptional. And the question that I want to know is, or what does it mean if you have to be exceptional? You know, how can we make it so that people can actually fulfill their potential, even if they're not Einstein? You know, like a lot of people have a lot to contribute, even if they aren't off the charts. Like they may have something really special. And how do we make a world where they can give what they have, which is probably also really great if they had what they needed.
Another take I'll have is so you wrote about algebra class, I think it was algebra, right, where you were not doing well in the class because you taught yourself and it was okay, you said. But
yeah,
not
algebra was not my strong suit on that test, no.
And so you go to office hours to talk to your professor. And your professor says if you get 100 on one test, then you get an A. And what you wrote you said, well, yeah, why not? I'm the queen of long shots. And there was a moment when I read that and I went, oh, that's like powerful to believe in yourself like that. And then my second moment, was that face. My second moment, and it goes back to like what you were just saying before, where in a lot of ways you had to be the queen of long shots. And not to put this just on you, but a lot of people have to. And so there's like this system that exists that means if you're not, you fail.
Yeah, I mean, I did end up getting 100. I mean, I failed the first exam. I think I got a D on the second exam. I was really not doing well in that class. And then I went in to talk to him because I had a scholarship that was based completely on my GPA, and I had to keep it above a 3.93, which was not going to happen if you're failing math class. Like, I was going to lose it. And I knew if I lose the scholarship I had, I probably wouldn't be able to come back. I just didn't have the funds. So I went in there trying to find an answer, and the answer he gave me is stop failing the exams and get a perfect score.
Yeah.
Not 99%, but 100. And then he said so many people were failing the class, he actually offered that to everybody. I don't know how many other people. So I really committed, and I had this sort of invincibility complex, and I believed that I could do it, and I was able to do it in the end. I don't know. I mean, but you could easily imagine it going the other way. You could easily imagine, no matter how hard you worked, getting a question wrong. One question. And that's terrifying. It shouldn't be that close. And when I look back on it, I also think, I could have applied for a Pell Grant that semester. I did not because I'd been raised with this really extreme ideology, and my dad had told me that that's how the government gets you, and they get you dependent on them, and then you are beholden to that. You know, I was all afraid of a Pell Grant because of the way I'd been raised. But the year later, when I did apply for a Pell Grant and they sent me a check for $4,000, suddenly I can focus, I can actually learn things. Like I was getting up at that time and I remember I was cleaning bathrooms in the engineering building at 4 a.m. And I did it at 4 a.m. and not 8 a.m. because it paid $1 more if you did an hour, $1 more. And, you look back on your life and you're like, wow, I didn't get any sleep for 2 years for I don't know, $1,500. Like it just seems like an insane exchange that was made there. But I think it really is Maslow's needs, and I think curiosity is often a luxury that is reserved for the financially secure. You actually have to have a baseline of security to be able to stop and not just react to your classes and try to get the assignments in on time, but to start paying attention to what do I enjoy doing and what am I good at and what doesn't feel like work to me. These are reflective things. These are like sitting and occupying your body and your mind and thinking, how do I feel about this? And you can't do that unless you have a baseline of security.
There's this concept that we talk about, securing the foundation. That's important in the culture of opportunity. Like to create that is, if, to your point, if people don't have that, like it's really hard to launch yourself off of. I'd love to bring up this piece that you wrote last year in the New York Times. It was, I am not proof of the American dream. Why not?
Well, I think people think of the American dream and they think of Horatio Alger and the idea that hard work and any amount of, no matter what your circumstances are, that you can really work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I was aware when I was writing my book that there there was a way that I hoped the story would be used to tell people, like, you can change your life, and the life that you have isn't the only life available to you. I wanted it to be used that way, but I didn't want it to be used as an excuse to do nothing or to say that everything is okay, we don't actually need to help people because they'll be fine. And so when I wrote that article, I was also thinking about what it was like when I went through as a student and what it would be like to go through now. I was incredibly lucky. I went to Brigham Young University. I was Mormon at the time. I was LDS, and so I got to go to this school that's heavily subsidized by the Mormon Church. I mean, heavily. So my tuition when I went, I remember, I think it was $1,200 my first semester. I think by the time I graduated, it was $1,500. My rent was $110 a month. This was, especially with a $4,000 a year Pell Grant, which I was eligible for, I mean, this was really doable. You know, I worked and I had a couple jobs and I worked in the summers, but this was something that could be achieved. And when I think about what that ladder looks like now for students, it feels like some of those rungs have fallen out, you know, and it was a hard climb when I made that climb, but it was doable. But I worry now that it might that it might be harder, actually. The tuition is so much more. There's so much less support. I think the numbers have to be imaginable. You know, like if you told me when I was 16, go to college, it's going to be $50,000 a year, I just would have laughed and been like, well, that's never going to happen. The numbers, they wouldn't have been imaginable. I needed them to be imaginable.
So it sounds like this is a worse title, what I'm going to say, but
Perfect.
It sounds like
I can't wait.
Wait for it. I am not proof that there still is an American dream. I think is what you were trying to say ultimately. I'm putting words in your mouth.
I like my title.
No, it's much better. I said it's a worse title.
Yeah, I'm not proof of the. I mean, I'm not. Is there? Let's think. There's a question. I mean, there's an interesting question about is there an American dream, and was there an American dream? Obviously, I think there still is. People do make it, and there is opportunity there. But I think we have to pay attention to the fact that it is always a question of degrees, and at times in our history, it's been easier, and there is a greater amount of opportunity, equality of opportunity, and at times in our history, it's been much harder. And I think we are moving into a period where it's much harder. And why? And what are the costs of that? Because I do think that there's a lot of wasted talent, I think, when you take half the population, say, and just make it so hard for them to get an education that it just becomes almost an impossibility. Or maybe we create a world where education is so qualitatively different for the top half that it just doesn't even resemble what we're offering. Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous even to use the same word because I mean, and I see it now, like I see it with my friends who are from more well-off families. They get a lot of one-on-one time. They go to universities where they live with the other students. They are in small classes. They have mentors. And then I know a lot of people back in Idaho. They're graduating from college. They've never met a teacher. You know, they've been doing virtual and online and classes that are basically on YouTube. They've not met another human being in 4 years of college. And that to me is like we're making and I think online can be an incredible resource. There's a lot of amazing things to having the ability to Google like Kierkegaard and watch like a lecture series on Kierkegaard. It's kind of amazing. But the idea that some people wouldn't have access.
The best thing about online is to Google Kierkegaard? Is that what you say?
To each their own, you know, like everybody's got their thing. But like, it's an amazing thing to have it, but I don't think it should mean that what we're offering to people with the lower income is just a totally qualitatively different thing. We're like, yeah, you got an education and you got an education, but you know, it feels unfortunate to allow it to be so different.
There are a couple of quotes, I just want to read them directly, that you had in this piece that I think tie back to your idea.
Oh, perfect. I can leave. You can just read the op-ed.
So first, the full complexity of my opinion on inequality and poverty then could have been summed up with utter simplicity. I was tired.
Yeah, that was the 4 a.m. That was when I was working, at 4 a.m. I mean, I never got a chance to really sleep. You know, I think I had at least 2 jobs at that time. And I might have had 3. And plus I had all my classes. And I was taking the maximum number of credits because I wanted to graduate faster because I thought I couldn't afford to be in school, you know. And so I was just tired. I worked at a cafeteria. I remember I would do 4 to 8 with the janitorial staff, and then I would go serve breakfast to the kids, the freshmen who lived in the dorms. So I would serve this breakfast that I didn't have the money to eat. And I didn't mind. I don't remember thinking anything, about, like I said, I had no high-minded political thoughts or this is unfair or I was just tired. Like I just wanted to go to sleep. And once I got that Pell Grant and my whole life changed is when I really felt like I was able to start my education. I was able to take classes I didn't need because I was interested in them. I was able to buy my textbooks. I was able to do all the reading. I was able to do more reading. I just had time.
Yeah. The context of that, I think, is really important for people to understand broadly. If I summarize this, it's like if you take poverty and simply summarize it as it's people that are tired, you're exhausted, and take that context and how do you think about how society should think about opening up the aperture that you talked about before to provide more people for learning with the context that there's a group of people that are tired?
I mean, I think we really have to think about who's benefiting from it's this strange promise that we've been given for so long that once we have the machines to do the work that people can rest. And it's not happening, It's actually turning out that the people are being more and more treated like machines. And Jenny Odell's written an amazing book about this. Her book on time, I think, is really interesting. But this kind of question of what future are we building and for who and how do we make it so that this amazing technology that we have actually results in people being treated more like people and not less.
How did you think about... how did you think about trade-offs at the time?
At the time?
Yeah.
I didn't think about anything at the time. I was reacting, I think is the best way to put it. I had no long-term thoughts about major or what came after or what I liked doing it was just very reactive time. And I think that's when you get your basic needs met is when you actually get to start thinking about your future and what you love to do. And at the time, I really didn't have everything for me was very immediate. And I had a lot of my brain occupied with just the exact balance of my bank account and what money I had coming in and who I owed what. If you'd woken me up at 3 a.m. just shaking me awake and said, how much money I would have told you, like $26.39. Like I knew, I had no idea what my classes were about, but I knew what my bank account, had in it. And that's it. I have no idea how much money is in my bank account right now. And that's, I think money, what it really gets you is the freedom to think about things besides money.
Yeah.
And I did not have that at the time. Money was the only thing I thought about.
How did mentorship, sponsorship, people in your life help you at the time?
I've been really lucky. I had a lot of people help me. And the concept of mentor is I try to think about how did people help me and what role did they really play. And I've gotten kind of interested in Winnicott and this idea that your first attachment figures, usually your parents, they reflect a certain idea of you to you. And I think our conceptions of self, they're made up of our biology and our brains and our own ideas, but they're also made up of what other people see in us. And I think when you're young, that's your parents. And then as you go out into the world, you meet other people who are also a mirror. They reflect you back to you. And I think the best mentors I've had in my life were mentors who reflected me a new idea of who I was. I thought, well, I'm a farmer. I work in my dad's junkyard. I'm this kind of person. And then I met professors at my university and friends and all kinds of people who reflected a new idea of me to me. It was a new thought. And I think it's one of the most powerful things you can do for a person is see more in them than they have seen prior to meeting you.
When you think about yourself now, how much do you take from the mirror that you had as a kid that was reflected back on you and what you took?
Well, I think we all were stuck with that's your first mirror, and it's always going to be powerful. It's always going to be powerful. You never really get rid of that image, I don't think, but you can supplement it with other images. And we get voices in our head. I think the way that we speak to ourselves, if you really pay attention to how you speak to yourself, I suspect you'll recognize those voices from other parts of your life. And I don't know as though there's a certain like rigidity that I have that I know has come from my father. My father was a very rigid, very rule-bound person, a kind of fearful person. And I talk to myself in that voice all the time. It's strong. I'll probably never be free of it. But I have added other voices that respond, And so I have a wider range of voices that I sound like I'm advocating everyone to become schizophrenic. I'm not, but I think you can learn to speak to yourself in different ways, and I think it's actually really crucial when you think about education and believing in the future and believing in other people. Extending other people good faith and kindness actually requires you to have a range of voices, not just the fear voice, not just the rule voice, but like more hopeful voices, more believing voices. And I think when I was younger, I had much more narrow range.
Is there strength from the voice as a kid that you still pull on?
I think that there were good things that I got. Like I said, I think learning how to read complicated things, and I think I learned a lot about my family had a lot of emphasis on autonomy, the idea that your education really is your responsibility. I think they took that a bit far. But I think there's a reason that when two of my brothers and me, when we got to college, we took it very seriously. It was something we hadn't had access to before. And so suddenly having it, we were like, this is amazing. How could anybody not want to do this? And not everyone had that reaction, but I do think that there were good things. So you want to, with your life, keep hold of those things which are good, but add to them.
Yeah, it's important. It's a kind of a hard concept, don't you think, for people generally? I mean,
schizophrenia, talking to yourself.
Exactly.
Or a different concept?
How do you manage those voices? Maybe not how do you. How would you? How do you add on to that context? I think as an individual, we all go through stuff.
I think there's only really one way. I wish there were more ways, but I think there might just be the one way. And the only way that I've ever successfully added a new voice to my life is by adding a new person to my life who had that. You can like tell yourself these things all day long, but I think when you have friends that mirror for you a more open way of being or believing in you or a different way of approaching the world, and you spend time with people who have different temperaments and ideas, I think I noticed it actually, funny enough, when I finally, when I was like 32, went to therapy, like real therapy. I went to free university therapy at Cambridge, but because it was free, I think I was sort of like, I'm here, but I wasn't really there. But when I was 32, I was like, no, I actually need help. I'm going to get some therapy. And I noticed the first thing that changed for me, I just had a new voice in my head. I had this person was in my head, and it was a totally different way of speaking to me and thinking about the world and other people than what I'd grown up with. And it was a new voice. And since then, I've noticed my close friends, the people that you have that are closest to you, I think will end up really influencing, they're kind of your most important education, actually, and are the other people in your life.
That's that perspective that you mentioned before. What's the importance of storytelling in like working with other people, hearing their stories, telling your story? How's that impacted your education?
Well, I have this weird desire to ask you that question because I feel like you have an answer to it.
For you?
No, not for me, for you.
Oh, wow.
Oh, did I trick you? I didn't mean to trick you.
No.
It seemed like the kind of question that you thought about a lot, and I wondered if you...
Yeah, I have thought about it. I still want to... Can you answer it at some point?
I will,
I'm happy to start, though.
You start us off, and I'll...
Sorry, you can't just get out that easily.
I won't. Oh, I'm not cheating. I'm just interested.
Conceptually, I believe that one of the things that separates human beings from... There's a lot, but from other creatures... Yeah, thumbs and stories, I think, is about it. And so for me, it's something that helps... concepts to stick, right, is a story. And you can take these universal concepts which people have, and they can say, like, I think I kind of get it in the abstract, but it's the story that, like, makes it specific that I believe makes things, like, stick. And if you have you read a book, right? You have a mentor. I think you can start to pull those concepts together and say, like, I see myself a little bit in this paragraph in your book, and I see myself a little bit in what you described as a mentor, and I think that that helps like an individual to start to tell their own story and hold up their own mirror. I think that's generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think I thought a fair bit about storytelling and what it does, and just why did I do it? Like, what was this for? And I think there's so many answers to that question. You could talk about it all day, but I think a lot of times when we live our lives, we can split. We can have certain experiences and memories that go in one part of our brain, but they don't really communicate with other parts of our brain. And I think one thing that you get from storytelling is continuity. Like when you externalize something, whether you paint it or you dance it or you write it down, you take it outside of yourself. And I think a weird thing happens where you can actually look at it and your brain can take it in again. And I think that this can result in just a much more coherent person. You know, I mean, when psychologists measure well-being, like mental well-being, they have a lot of ways they do it, but one of the ways that they measure it is consistency. You know, so if you are telling a story about, you know, your mother, but it's actually kind of an unkind story, maybe she withheld something, but you're saying, oh, I had the best mother ever, she just like didn't like to feed us because she didn't want us to get fat, you know, then you might be like, there's a gap there, like something's wrong. And one of the things they're looking for, I find this really encouraging. You don't have to have had a perfect life. You don't even have to have had a good life, but you do have to know the truth of your life. Like you do need to know what of the things that you've experienced were love, and what of the things that you've experienced were envy, and what of the things, you know, you have to kind of be able to distinguish and know the truth so that you can label things correctly, and then when you go out as an adult, don't pursue things that are actually cruelty, but label them love. You know, I mean, I've done a lot of that in my life, so I know what that's like. But you have to be able to label behaviors correctly so that you can later, not so you can condemn people and never talk to them again, but just so that you can know what you're looking for. And I think storytelling can be incredibly powerful when it comes to allowing your life to be what it is. Whether that's a happy story or a sad story or a story with happy parts and sad parts, which is actually where all of us live in some combination of that, but that you have to know the truth of your life.
I'm going to take a little tangent. Hopefully it's not a derailment. We'll see here. So stick with me.
Exciting.
So there was, when I was, I think 11 or 12, I wrote this paper on Oskar Schindler. And do people know who Oskar Schindler is? Okay.
You might need to explain.
Okay. So Oskar Schindler was a German during World War II. He's German before as well, but a German during World War II, and he took a lot of Jewish people into his like factories in order to save them from the Holocaust. And I was that's a very short version. I was fascinated by this story. And so I studied him as an 11-year-old. And I went and wrote this paper. I went to the libraries and read a lot about Oskar Schindler and learned about the full man. And what I learned was Oskar Schindler was a pretty terrible human being. He was a womanizer. He like drank all the time. He was an abuser. And then he did this magical thing. And I'll turn this into something in a second. But what it really got me thinking about as a kid was I said, you can be a terrible person and do a great thing, and you can be a great person and do terrible things. And that like mix of good and bad, I think, and like the definition even in someone's brain of good and bad, I think kind of got not mixed up for me, but I said it's not clean. And as you were just talking about like what in life is love and what is cruelty and not mixing those up, like it kind of just came back for me.
Yeah, I think we get in trouble when we need people to be all good or all bad, and we either idealize them or we demonize them. We get trapped in certain roles, and we trap other people in certain roles. And they're adaptive strategies. There are reasons why we do this, but it's probably not always serving us really well. And just allowing what was to actually have been that thing, and accepting the truth of the story, whatever that truth is. And without judgment and hostility, and I think that there's a lot of, it would be in some ways, you could imagine a history where we all tell ourselves that he had no problems, and he saved all these people, and he must be great. But I think we all have that's not really it's not true, and I think the complex version seems like a much better reflection of what human beings are actually like.
Yeah. I didn't really mean to stick on the Holocaust this long, but I do have a question around you. There was a story of you when you learned about the Holocaust. Would you mind telling that story, and then I have a question about it?
Yeah, so when I went to college for the first time, I'd never been in a classroom. There's a lot of things I didn't know. I definitely had heard my parents talk about the Holocaust at least once, but in my head somehow it was like the Boston Massacre. I thought like 5 or 6 people. There was a skirmish, and some people had, like a handful of people had died. That was really what I thought it was. And then I went to college, and I was sitting in this an art classroom of all things, and they put up a painting, and in the title it had that word, and I kind of remember, I just didn't know what it meant, so I raised my hand and I asked, I don't know this word, what does this word mean? And everybody in the class, I think they heard it as a denial. I was like, what is this? And they heard it as, what is this? And I think they heard it in a very different way, and I just knew I'd said something really wrong, that moment where you've 50 people looking at you and they're all mad. And I didn't know why. I had no idea what I'd said, but I knew I'd done something really wrong. And so I waited for the class to end, and then I went to the computer lab, and I remember I typed it in. I think Wikipedia had just become a thing. And I read about it, and the world changes when you're living in a world where the Holocaust has happened, and then 1 minute it never happened, and the next minute it has happened. And you're trying to process this thing, and also just process that it could have happened and I didn't know about it. How could something this giant have happened and it just have been, and you realize history is like that. Things can exist in other people's minds that just don't exist in your mind. Big, big, big things. And that was a really big, terrible moment. Not just terrible because I learned about something awful, but terrible because I learned kind of the depth of my own ignorance, which was pretty scary.
And there's also a moment there where people kind of, maybe this is the wrong phrase, but like wrote you off because of that. And it makes me think that there are times, it's a big thing, but there are times where because someone doesn't know a piece of content, going back to how you talked about education, if there's some content that someone doesn't know, how do you write off their full aptitude? And I think that happens a lot for people.
I think it happens a lot. It's difficult because you do want to hold people accountable for what they don't know in some way. Another thing I didn't know anything about civil rights movement. I knew very little about slavery. I went into a classroom with all of that ignorance, and I had to learn about it, And I remember he was telling us about Rosa Parks, and he's telling us a story, and I was completely confused. I thought he was saying that she had stolen the bus seat. It's like a really unfortunate misunderstanding between to take a seat versus to take that seat. Because I just couldn't imagine that there would have been in the recent history of my country a time where you could get arrested for sitting down. It wasn't in my brain. I didn't understand it at all. And he's telling the story. And I worked in a junkyard, so I had some idea what was involved in removing a bus seat. And I was just like, why would you do that in a bus full of people? Why does she need the bus seat? Like, what is going on? Who steals a bus seat when people are on the bus? And then, of course, the story turned, and he was telling the story about Emmett Till, and there's no way to misunderstand that story. I understood it. And again, I was just living in a different country than I thought I was, and just that idea, like big, big things can be different in the world than they are in my head, and what does that mean? But back to your question of what do we do with those people? What do we do with people who are walking around with ignorance? And what if they say things that are actually hurtful, which is kind of likely? And I don't know. I think it has to be a mix of compassion, realizing that education is a privilege like any other privilege, and some people don't get it. But also, when people are being hurtful, that we step in and we do what we need to do to protect someone that they might be harming. I think it's a mix. It's both things, and it's difficult to hold on to complexity. It'd be much easier to say, oh, it doesn't matter what anybody says, or they're not responsible at all because they didn't get an education, and it's not either of those. It's somewhere in the middle.
I think we have time for, let me check probably one more question.
Okay.
I didn't mean to build it up that much. But going off the civil rights.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. It's the last question.
It is. I want to end on the concept of inequality. And there are a lot of times when inequality happens, and I believe, on it's a day-to-day thing. Like there are everyday behaviors where it occurs. And then people look for these big ticket items to end it. Like, it's when a war is won, and they're like, okay, that justice, comes from that, or there's legislation that's passed. But it's really the day-to-day stuff. And you have this quote, says, when you were learning about the civil rights movement, you said, surely all of justice had been served, right, by all, right?
Sure, we all came to our senses.
And the issue had been resolved. Like, you couldn't
Of course.
believe that at the end of slavery, that 100 years later, like the civil rights movement was kind of coming on. Where do you feel like in your seat that you occupy today, like kind of how do you feel like you can address that ongoing, what I'll just call a discrepancy between like the big stuff that people think have to occur and then the day-to-day behaviors that really solve these issues?
I think a lot about, that ignorance was just, I just never encountered that world before. It was so foreign to me. I hadn't read a lot of history. I lived in Idaho. I hadn't met people who encountered this. So I think part of it was just going out into the world, reading, combination of reading experience and experience, and I think my mind starts to change. But the larger question you're talking about of what do we do in a world that is increasingly fragmenting people and increasingly sorting people. These are the educated people, these are the wealthy people, these are the people with these types of skills, and we put them here and we put everybody else over here. And how do you resist that? And I think resistance is really crucial because the reality is policy is so important, but I would never have applied for that Pell Grant if somebody hadn't told me to. And not just somebody that I met for 2 minutes in a counselor's office, but someone I trusted. In my case, it was a Mormon bishop, kind of the equivalent of a pastor. But there was someone in my life, in my circle of trust, who said to me, have you thought about this thing that your dad says is the devil? And I was like, no, I really haven't. And after a year of that, I was like, maybe my dad's wrong and this person who I like very much is right. And I think if we allow ourselves to segregate by education, by income, if we really get to a place in our lives where we think, well, the people I invest in are the people who more or less are like me, whether that's race or religion, or I think mostly it's income and education. I think if we do that, we're cutting ourselves off from so much richness, and we're really building a world that has not a lot of hope in it, And I think you're building a more frightening world, even for people who do have opportunity because they're terrified of losing it. And living in a world where if you fall hard is actually not a very good world for anybody. Like, nobody wants to live in that world. So I think there's political processes that need to happen. There are policies that need to change. But I also think looking at your own life, who are the people in your sphere that you can be available to and make a difference for? Not condescending, obnoxious way, but just recognizing I've been given gifts. How can I share them? I've been given things. And how can I make that available to the people in my life who weren't given that? And I think so much of change comes from people that you know. So I think it's really thinking about how wide is your circle and can you make it a little wider?
Actually, I'm going to say one more question then.
Oh,
Thank you for that. Sorry. So the book's 5 years old. What have you learned over the past 5 years, even maybe about your own story, that's contributed to your education?
Oh, this is a hard question. What have I learned about it? It surprised me that the other people identified with it. I remember when I was writing it, I thought, this book's gonna do great with like little girls who worked in their dad's junkyard, and then like went to school at 17 and then went to Cambridge. They're gonna love this book. Like, those two people are gonna be so into it. And I do think that something I did learn was what a relief it is to people when you say things that you think you're not able to say. Because it turns out there's often a lot of people who also feel like they can't say that thing, and that's just kind of a relief, the things that you think are unsayable, realizing, actually we all have these things. Maybe not everybody was kept out of school, but a lot of people have complicated relationship with their parents and are trying to figure out, how do I be loyal to them and loyal to myself? It's not a totally uncommon thing, and I think that surprised me, the just willingness to say, my life is imperfect, and there are parts of it that are going really well and parts of it that are a total disaster. and allowing other people to say, yes, me also, and support each other in that way. And I think it's kind of the opposite of holding everyone to an insane and perfect standard. But again, it's that knowing the truth of your life and then being able to say to other people, here's where I'm a little bit lost, and actually finding support and community around that instead of isolation and fearfulness, but actually get what you need.
Powerful. Well, thank you for the time. Thank you for writing the book. It's meant a lot to me personally, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.